and welcome to the December 2017 edition of the Patreon Party People podcast. I'm back. I'm your host, Ryan Bloom, and it has been a long time since we've had a proper Patreon Party People podcast. I think the last time you guys might have heard from me was June 2017, which was at this point 5 or 6 months ago. I have it written here like all over in my notes as 5 months ago, but thinking about it now, it's probably more like 6. Like June is the 6th. Yeah, June is the 6th month, so plus 6 is December. It has been 6 months. Sorry if I sound a little bit echoey. I don't think there's anything I can do about that right now. Chances are you guys probably don't really notice it, probably doesn't really bother you. It's just if you're a picky audiophile like me, it's something that I hear constantly because I'm in this room and I can hear it. I can hear my own voice bouncing off all the walls. But I think as far as recording goes, it'll be fine. But hey, guess what? We're in the apartment now, finally. I mean, we've been in the apartment for, 3 weeks now, probably, roughly. I know I made some pretty awful attempts at updating you guys on my situation previously. That ended up being really kind of like super short. And I want to apologize for that. It's been a little hard for me to focus these last 6 months on just about anything. And that's kind of what we'll get into in this podcast. We've got a lot of ground to cover. A lot of ground to cover. Finally, the truth can be told, and such like. But, I just want to thank all my Patreon supporters for sticking with me for as long as they have. Because, I know my output went way, way down. I anticipated not being out of the game this long. I tried to build up like a buffer of YouTube videos while I was going to be gone. I figured, I have videos up until September. That'll be more than enough time. We'll find an apartment. It'll be like I never left. And, well, it's December, obviously. And a lot of things have gone wrong since I came out here to Nevada. But, I guess we'll just get into that right now. Also, forgive me if you hear, weird sounds. I don't have a desk right now, so I'm kind of holding the microphone stand right now. And I'm going to have to be editing out a lot of coughs and a lot of sniffles for, again, reasons we'll get into. But goodness, it has been a long 6 months. So, I'll try and go through everything quickly because I have 13 pages of notes here to go through, recounting everything that's been going on since the last time we formally spoke. So I guess we'll just dive right into that as I keep saying. Okay, so checking my notes. Again, it was probably I don't know, it's been so long, I don't remember if the last podcast you guys heard from me was the beginning of June, the middle of June, or the end of June. I think it was the beginning of June. I think that was, I knew I had to pack up and move, and I hadn't really had the energy. I hadn't really had the interest in actually getting anything like that done. And, that's kind of just how it is when you've lived in a place for 24 years, as I had. There were so many memories in that place. Almost every memory I can ever remember having was inside that house because we lived there since 1993 and it is 2017. So, my entire transition from childhood to teenager to adult was basically all in that house. Almost every video game console I ever owned was in that house. Every computer I ever owned was in that house. I started my YouTube channel in that house. I learned game development in that house. Just all this stuff, all these memories in that house. But it got to a point where it was like 2 or 3 days until my brother was to roll in and take all our stuff and leave. And I think that's when I finally pulled it together enough that I finally started packing. And I don't know if I was doing this by the time I did the last podcast or not, but I ended up doing this absolutely gigantic Twitter thread. Oh wait, no, yeah, I did. I started that back in like May or whatever when the first load had to go to Nevada. But I picked that up again in June for the second load. Just, going through old artwork, going through basically my entire childhood, figuring out what was worth packing, what was worth throwing away, things like that. I'll link that in the show notes here for this podcast. So look into the description. I made like 5 different Twitter moments about it because I guess Twitter has like a size limit for a moment. And, this thread was like 300, 400, 500, 600 tweets of just old artwork and old video games and old action figures, things like that. But the real thing that I'd been putting off for so long while I was packing was dealing with my closet. I hadn't actually opened or looked inside that closet in probably about 16 years, 15, 16 years. I think when I finally did open it, the stuff that was all on like the top layer of the closet was like old magazine ads, old Christmas ads from like 2002, 2003. So, it had been a long time since I dealt with that closet. And that's generally because even though it was a place where I kept like all my toys and even like a bunch of clothes and stuff, we had like a really bad mouse infestation around that time. Our house was like really bad about mice because it was an old farmhouse from like the early 1900s that they brought in from like a coal mine. It was actually the landlord's old house. And because it was this like super old, super cramped little farmhouse, or at least half of it was, had like the ceiling, the weather ceiling was really bad. That's how we ended up having like so many snakes get in the house. We had birds get into the house. And every now and then, like every 3 to 5 years, we just get overrun with mice. And it was awful. It was just terrible. And when we had cats, it wasn't so bad because the cats would, catch and kill the mice, and you just scoop them up in like a dustpan and take them out to the garbage and throw them away. But once we stopped having cats and we started having dogs, dogs, they don't really kill mice. They don't really care about mice. They just kind of bark at them and just sort of leave them alone. So we ended up, getting just like really bad mice infestations, and I could hear them clawing around in my closet. And I knew that after a certain point, the only way to really deal with that closet was to buy face masks and gloves, and because, mice poop and stuff. So it was more just convenient to leave the closet sealed. And, that's not very healthy either. I realized that. But, it was just a case of never really being equipped to deal with it, never really having the knowledge or energy to deal with it. We couldn't really, call out an exterminator. We didn't really want to bother the landlords about it. You get into like this really bad mental habit of these things sometimes. And, this was also when I was in the middle of like really deep depression. So, problems compound on top of problems on top of problems, and it ended up being this thing that I never wanted to deal with. It was easy to just ignore, just never open the door, never look inside, and the problem isn't there. But obviously now you're moving, there are important things in that closet that I wanted to take with me. So it was finally time. I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to go in there and dig some stuff out and deal with it the best that I could. Because, there were toys in there. Toys that I wanted to keep, like old Jurassic Park toys, old stuffed animals. My Sega Game Gear was in there. And thankfully, all that stuff, all the important stuff that I could, think of that was in my mind thinking, okay, this is the stuff I want to take. All of that ended up being, like, some of the first things I found. Like, surprisingly enough, everything that was important to me was all right on top, right where... I didn't have to dig through all this years and years of old garbage and old toys and potentially like mouse nests and things like that. So, that was actually fairly easy to deal with. The only thing that was really a big problem was my Sega Game Gear. In that closet, I ended up finding it in a bag where apparently I had been keeping some old Halloween candy, which, Halloween candy plus mice is not a good scene. So hopefully the Game Gear still works. It's all covered in muck and grime. I think it's just old candy. Hopefully if I just clean it up, it'll still work. But for those of you who followed me on Twitter, you'll know that I tweeted out pictures of an Atari Lynx I had. That was another thing that was, buried deep in a bookcase where mice had gotten into it. And I ended up cleaning up the Atari Lynx as best I could, and for the life of me, I couldn't get it to power on. So, the Game Gear might be dead. The Game Gear, it sounds like, from what I've heard over the years, the Game Gear is a very fragile piece of hardware. It's difficult to find one, like on eBay or whatever, that still actually works. So if mine doesn't work, that'll be a bummer, of course, but also it might have just succumbed to time, Maybe the capacitors inside are just naturally bad. Maybe they leaked over time. Who knows? But the Game Gear is here with me in Nevada now. So is like an old plush. I had the Sonic and Tails plushies, the original ones from like 93, 94. Probably got those about the time we moved into that house, actually. But the real important plushie to me was... when you're like super young and you have this one toy that's like your best friend, right? Like Woody from Toy Story or Hobbs from Calvin and Hobbes. Well, mine was this little Tigger plush. My mom had like cut a little shirt out for him using an old sock and everything. And when I was, say, 6, 7, 8 years old, that guy was my best friend. He went with me everywhere. I carried him around supermarkets when I went shopping with my mom, all kinds of stuff. So he's very important. He has a lot of sentimental value for me. And thankfully I found him. He's actually in a box right next to me right here. He probably needs to be washed, to be fair. He probably hasn't been washed in, 18, 19, 20 years at this point. So, he needs to go through the washer. He probably needs to be stitched up a little bit. I seem to remember that one of his arms was coming off at one point, so he needs sewing. But, I found him. I brought him with me. That's great. That's exactly what I wanted. I found my Game Gear. I found my Sonic plushies. And I found a couple like other old toys that I thought, oh yeah, I'll take this with me. One was this Velociraptor toy from, I don't remember if it was actually like any known Jurassic Park movie. You know how when like a toy line from a movie is really popular, they'll keep making toys like long after the TV show, long after the movie comes out. This is like a Velociraptor toy. Like I have the brown one, the original Jurassic Park brown Velociraptor toy. This one is the same mold, but he's kind of like all these neon colors. He's like bright green and electric yellow and all this other stuff. He's really pretty, and he's still in the box and everything. I think that's in the box here with Tigger next to me. So, I took that with me. I took all the Jurassic Park toys I could find. I had one of those, like, those little plastic eggs with like the baby Velociraptor in it. He's like about, a foot and a half tall. I found that, and I think I packed that away too. Just stuff like that. Stuff that jumps out to me as being like super memorable. I found my Micro Machines. I found my Lego, stuff like that. That came with me. But, everything else in that closet was trashed, which is unfortunate, but also, I haven't looked at any of that stuff in more than 16 years. I was, at some point around the time the closet was sealed permanently, I was already like 18, 19, 20 years old. I wasn't really playing with action figures and stuff like that anymore. So it's not the biggest deal to get rid of all that stuff. I had cousins that wanted to look through there because they had memories of my toys. We'd sit in my bedroom a lot and, like play around and, When I was young, a big thing for me was like inventions, right? Like we'd take toys and we'd mix and match them and create all these contraptions and things like that. That was a big part of my childhood. But I had to throw all that stuff away, and I definitely wasn't going to let anyone else go into my closet with the state everything else was in. And speaking of everything that got left behind, like, holy crap, like I told you guys earlier, I don't have a desk right now. I had to leave my desk behind. I had to leave my nicer speakers behind. I don't know, like 10, 15 years ago, I bought this really nice, like, creative speaker set. The actual speakers themselves were fairly cheap, but it came with this big, heavy subwoofer. But, I also I'm the kind of person that when I'm on the computer, I always have headphones on. So, it wasn't a big deal to leave those speakers behind, but they were still like $30 speakers. Those got left behind because there wasn't enough room. I said my computer desk got left behind, my computer chair, my bed, my stereo, at least 2 functioning CRT TVs that were just, they're big, heavy things that you can't really move. They're like 150 pounds each, and one of them was in the basement. So there's no way we're getting that thing up the stairs, and there's no way we're getting it into the trailer with everything else. So we had to leave that behind. We left behind our couch, our recliner, basically every bookcase we owned, dressers, just, we left a lot of furniture behind. We left a lot of electronics behind. I salvaged all the video games I could find, but, there was just no room. There's no room in the place we are in now. There was no room in the trailer to bring them out. My brother was already getting like super worried that the trailer was getting too heavy. That was just... And even after we packed everything, we thought, okay, here's the minimum we need to pack. Here, the trailer's full. We can't take any more. We ended up finding like a bunch more stuff. I have a stack of CDs behind me that were supposed to go on the trailer, but we had to take them on our carry-on luggage. So my mom was actually like really terrified of all the stuff we had to leave behind, because it's like, my brother packs up the trailer, everything's loaded up, we can't load any more on the trailer, he closes it up and he leaves, and then you walk around the house and you look, and it looks like we still live there. It looks like we haven't moved out yet. Because like I said, we still had our couch there, we still had recliners, we still had TVs, stereos, speakers, desks, dressers, and, she was worried what the landlords were going to say. And right before we actually left the house, like a day or two before, the landlords ended up coming around and, to do like a move-out inspection to make sure that there was no real damage to the house, to assess, what had happened in the last 24 years or whatever. And actually, as they were walking through, my mom actually started to cry. And, they saw the house, they saw the state that it was in. Because, in the 24 years we had been there, they hadn't really done, like, too many major renovations. We had ceilings caving in certain rooms because we had roof problems where the roof would start leaking and then, the water would cause the ceiling to sag. And they'd patch the roof, but they'd never fix the ceiling inside the house. Things like that. We had doors that were falling off the hinges because, they were probably at least 30 years old by the time we got there. And then you add another 24 years on top of that. And, my mom's starting to cry at, how old and decrepit the house is looking. And actually, they went through and they said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about, all the damage that has been done wasn't by us. It was just strictly disrepair. It was, wear and tear from them, the landlords, not doing the renovations that were needed. Like, one of the renovations, why do I keep saying renovations, that they were supposed to do is every 7 years, they were supposed to come into the house and paint all the walls. And in the 24 years that we lived there, they only ever did that once, and they only ever did it to the living room. Maybe the living room and the kitchen. It's kind of hard to tell. They're kind of the same room. They never did any of the bedrooms. They never did my room. They never did the back room where the computer was. They only ever did the living room and the kitchen that one time, and that was like 18 years ago. So, there was a lot of stuff they should have done to that house that they didn't. There were a lot of repairs that we did to the house because, the landlords either didn't want to or we didn't involve them. So, because we're also the kind of people that like very much value our privacy. And, there was this whole thing when we first moved into the house about the landlords showing up unannounced. Just, they were in the neighborhood and they'd go, bam, bam, bam on the door, even though, by law, landlords are supposed to give you something like, gosh, what is it? It's like a week notice before they come over, and they never would. They'd just show up, knock on the door, and be like, "Oh, hi, how you doing? Can we come in? Can we see the house?" And it'd be like, "What? Why do you want to see the house? Like, we're just living here." And, eventually, enough times of not answering the door to the landlords, I think they eventually got the hint and stopped knocking. But, there was a lot of reason for us to not really want to deal with our landlords over the years. So, like I'm going back to this inspection, this move-out inspection, they're like, "Oh, you guys didn't do any damage to the house yourselves. Everything that was wrong with it was simply wear and tear." And they hug my mom and, they say, "Everything's okay, don't worry about it. Just leave, we'll handle everything." So, I think it was around, gosh, what was it? June 23rd or 24th that my brother left. And then we were in the house basically with nothing. We still had TV, but we didn't have cable. I remember I was bumming internet off from the neighbors next door because they had Xfinity, and my cousin gave me his Xfinity login so that, anywhere that there's an Xfinity Wi-Fi location, I can just log in with his credentials. That was kind of like a holdover from when I house sat for him, and he said he didn't care if I just, kept logging in wherever I could. So we were there in a mostly but not entirely empty house for 2 or 3 days, and then we went and we stayed with a cousin, a different cousin, not the one that let me borrow his Wi-Fi credentials. We stayed with her for like 3 or 4 days. And then I think it was long about July 2nd that we ended up getting on a train and coming out here to Nevada. No, wait, was it? I think it was July 3rd we got on the train. It was the morning of the 3rd. And then we got off the train on the 4th here in Nevada. The train ride out here was actually like surprisingly pleasant. I don't remember if I was doing this specific podcast. I think I did like a YouTube video about it, but I was out here in Nevada 2 years ago for my brother's wedding. And again, back then we took the train, same train and everything. It was like the California Zephyr, I think it is, from Union Station in Denver, out to, Union Station in Reno, I think. And that train ride 2 years ago was actually like, it was kind of a nightmare. The train was so packed, and there was no air conditioning, there was no Wi-Fi, even though like it would say, Amtrak Wi-Fi, you couldn't log on. And there were all these like little kids running around up and down the aisles, they were being super noisy. Coming out to Nevada 2 years ago was it was a huge nightmare. It was something that, thinking about coming out to Nevada this year permanently, thinking back to 2 years ago for the wedding, that's what made me so afraid to come out here to Nevada, because 2 years ago for the wedding was just, it might have been one of the worst experiences of my life. It was one of those things where you come back from the wedding and it's like, oh, I need a vacation from my vacation. That's the kind of situation it was. But this time, coming out to Nevada, it was like, it was really chill. Like, we got a lower level this time. There was so much room in the car that we were in that we each got our own seats. It was, air conditioned. It was full of just, really chill adults that, it was actually like really cool. I got to kick back and relax and like watch Moana on my tablet and just, you know, it was actually like really fun. And, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, if every train ride was like this, then, I'd love to ride the train. But unfortunately, that will probably be one of the last times I ever take a train anywhere. But the only real problem about the train ride this year was after sun went down. So, up to this point with the train ride and everything, I hadn't really been sleeping super well. Just the general stress of, moving out of the house. Then we get to my cousin's and I have to sleep on her couch in the basement, and the couch isn't very comfortable. And it's just, we're talking like a solid week here of just not being able to get a good quality sleep. And I'm figuring, okay, this is a really chill train car. Everyone's kind of quiet, keeping to themselves. There's plenty of air conditioning. I have plenty of room to stretch out. Tonight is the night that I'm going to get plenty of rest. And, watching Drew Scanlon's Cloth Map series on YouTube, I had taken Drew's tip to heart. Drew, gave all these travel tips on, the very first episode of Cloth Map. And one of his tips was bring earplugs and bring an eye mask. So that way, you can get silence and total darkness whenever you want it. So I spent the $7 and I got a really nice eye mask that came with earplugs. And I figured, okay, tonight's the night, I'll put my earplugs in, I'll put my eye mask down, and I'll get some sleep. I'll sleep on the train. It'll be great. It'll be fantastic. And wouldn't you know it, the sun goes down, the lights come up inside the train car, and suddenly the whole car that I'm in comes alive, and it's like this weird bonfire scenario where everyone's swapping stories and they're laughing, and it's just like this big party, and I'm the only one that's super quiet. I'm not talking to anyone. I have my eye mask on. I have my ear plugs in. I have my headphones on because everyone is being so loud, so boisterous that I can't actually shut them out. You think earplugs, you think, oh, I can't hear anything. No, that's not the way earplugs work. I could hear everyone, every word everyone said, and it was, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the rude jerk that's oh, could you guys quiet down? I'm trying to sleep. But it was a bummer. And I don't want to stereotype too much, but there was a guy diagonally from me that he was the worst one. He was the one that was kind of telling stories to everyone else. He kind of this burnt out sort of hippie guy that reminded me of Tommy Chong from Cheech and Chong, or I guess he was in that 70s show, that burnt out hippie character. He was the one that was telling stories of I don't even remember now because it was so long ago, but it was just, he had all these stories that were just on the edge of being unbelievable about things he did, people he met. It was almost this weird, Forrest Gump sort of scenario where he was, he was everywhere that was important. He was right there behind the scenes. He was there when JFK got shot. And no, that's not actually true, but you know what I mean, right? He was just supposedly this very important person, this very interesting person that was in all these crazy wild scenarios. And, it was fun listening to the stories he was telling, but it was also dude, I'm trying to get some sleep over here. And everyone just wouldn't shut up. And it was just, ugh. That was the only downside of that whole train trip. And to be fair to them, once I finally did doze off, because things did eventually quiet down, once I did doze off, I still couldn't sleep. I probably slept 4 hours on the train. Probably even less than that. So, that's just the way it was. We rolled into Nevada on July 4th, and rather than go see a fireworks show or anything like that, I kind of just got led into my brother's spare bedroom where they'd set up a bed for me, and I fell into bed, and I passed out for the rest of the night. That was where I finally got some sleep. And I woke up on July 5th thinking, I've only been in Nevada not even 24 hours and my allergies are acting up. And as it turned out, no. What had actually happened is that I'd fallen into my bed on July 4th and woke up with a cold. And that's not a very good introduction to the place you're going to live, is to wake up feeling like garbage. And I had to, my birthday was on July 6th, so I was sick through my birthday, which was a super bummer because she's 9 years old now, 10 years old. She's entering middle school next year. My niece, she and my sister-in-law went out and bought all this brownie mix and this ice cream stuff to do kind of like a birthday cake for me. And, I was so sick that I just kind of closed myself up in my bedroom and sort of laid around breathing through my mouth for a week. So, we couldn't really do anything with the cupcakes and the ice cream for a while, And to add on to the misery of, coming into Nevada, coming into my brother's spare bedroom and being sick, I also learned just how noisy their house was. I don't want to complain about it too much because that feels rude, but last year, well, not even last year, was it? Yeah, it was last December, my sister-in-law had twin boys. So where my bedroom was at my brother's place was kind of in the heart of the house. It was the most heavily trafficked place in the entire house. It was basically right next door to the living room, which was right next door to the kitchen. You go across the hall and there's the bathroom. So, people were always up and down and in and out and all around my bedroom all the time. And the walls were really super thin. So if you don't know about me, I guess I'm kind of noise sensitive. I don't like really noisy places. I don't like really noisy people. But the living room is kind of the playpen for the twin boys. So, they're in the living room all day, every day. They're just starting to learn not quite how to talk, but sort of how to make noise. So you have all these two boys in the living room just constantly screeching and squawking and pounding on the walls and throwing balls and toys around. And I'm in my bedroom, again, trying to get some sleep, trying to get better. And it's just, that's not a great scenario. But, obviously, I eventually did get better. And once I got better, it was time to, go looking for an apartment, obviously, or a house or whatever. When we came into Nevada, my mom told me the plan was that we were only going to be at my brother's a couple weeks. 2 weeks tops. She wanted to take the first thing that became available, and then we'd be out of there, and we'd be in our own place. And I thought, okay, that's fine. That, I have tons of YouTube videos lined up. I have, that'll be fine for me to get set up in a new place. And as it turned out, the first thing we had to do when we got into Nevada was to get set up through something called Housing and Human Services, which is this, it's this division of the government that can provide living assistance and things like that. And my mom's old enough that, she gets that stuff naturally. Whatever. I don't really pay much attention to that kind of stuff. But we had to get it set up through them before we, could go looking for any place. And before we got into Nevada, my mom had contacted the Nevada Housing and Human Services department or whatever, and they said, the day you get into Nevada, contact us and we'll contact you back, and then we'll get, everything all set up. And my mom did that the first day we got in. I'm laying in bed sick. She's on her cell phone hey, we're in Nevada, call and give us an appointment. They never called her back. We were at my brother's place for almost 3 weeks, probably closer to 4 weeks, almost an entire month, before they finally contacted my mom back and said, okay, come in for your meeting or whatever, and we'll tell you, places you can look for renting, where we can give you renter's assistance and things like that. So we spent, a whole month basically doing nothing, just waiting to hear back from them. And, okay, so the reason we came out to Nevada is because my brother promised us, he said, Nevada's this great place, everything's so cheap, you'll find an apartment, no problem, it'll be a good thing for you to come out to Nevada because everything's so cheap, basically. And we come out to Nevada, And as it turns out, he's wrong about almost everything. All the prices out here are probably about the same as they were back in Colorado. And there's like nothing out here to rent. And that's because of Elon Musk and his Tesla company. As it turns out, something my brother hadn't realized is that a couple years ago, Elon chose Nevada as the place he wanted to build his Tesla Gigafactory. It's about half an hour outside of Reno, Nevada, which is about 45 minutes drive from here. And this Gigafactory is supposed to be like one of the biggest factories in the United States. It's supposed to be about the size of like a small city or whatever. So because he's building the Gigafactory out here in Nevada, that means workers have to come out here to build it. Which means those workers need places to live, which means anything within about an hour's drive of this Gigafactory is bought up, basically. So, my mom hadn't really moved anywhere in a really long time, so she couldn't even remember, she didn't even know how things had changed since then. The last time we ever had to look for a place, it was back in the days where you physically had to look in the want ads in a newspaper. You had to drive around and actually look at places on foot with your eyeballs. You had to go put in physical applications. And what happens now is that everything's online. You apply online, you get approved online, you call phone numbers. You never actually get eyes on the place until you're actually approved to go look at the apartment. So, she's calling all these places, trying to find a place for us to live. And as it turns out, like I said, there's nothing out here. All the places, there's no vacancy. It's all these workers trying to go out there to the Gigafactory, either to build the Gigafactory, which construction, I think, is scheduled to finish 2020. So, that's an ongoing project, but even though it's still not all built yet, the factory itself is already under operation. Out there, they make Tesla batteries, and I think they might actually make the cars too. I'm not sure. So there's no vacancies out here to rent whatsoever. It's this huge housing shortage here in Nevada. And everywhere my mom calls has waiting lists. And some people have been on these waiting lists for these apartments for 2 years now. So, it's this really dire scenario where all of a sudden it's oh no, we're going to be stuck at my brother's place for, who knows how long, right? We could be here months, we could be here years even before anything opens up because, there are people that have lived in Nevada that have been waiting 4 years for somewhere to open up to move to. And to put it in perspective of how bad it was, my mom couldn't even find a 1-bedroom apartment, right? Which, was kind of our last ditch. If there's nothing else available, then we'll do a 1-bedroom and someone will just sleep on the couch. That was how dire things were starting to get for us. And even that wasn't available. It was probably the worst case scenario. And it's not like we were just looking within 30 minutes of Reno either. My mom was looking for apartments all the way out to Gardnerville, Minden, Elko. Elko's that's on the other side of the state, basically. That's a 6-hour drive from where my brother lives. So, we were looking as far as we were allowed to look here in the state of Nevada, and it just, there was nothing available anywhere. Because it was just waiting lists and years and years and months. And as if that wasn't bad enough, in the midst of all this, early in September, I ended up having to be rushed into the hospital one morning. Now, I wrote a big, huge blog post about this if you want the finer details. And of course, I'll link it in the video or the podcast description or whatever if you want to read it all. But basically, one night around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I started getting these really intense waves of pain in my lower left back. It started feeling out kind of like just, a muscle cramp, but, as each wave of pain got worse, it got worse, you know. And by the time the sun was coming up, long about, 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, it had gotten so bad that I was literally actually rolling around on my bedroom floor, just covered in beads of sweat. Just, I couldn't think clearly. I couldn't even really stand up almost, because I was just in so much pain. Like, we're talking like, imagine the worst pain of your entire life. Like, nothing else even compares to, like, this won't play to all my listeners, but imagine being kicked in the groin if you're a guy, and instead of that pain going away, it just kind of gets worse. So it's like just this really like sickening, aching pain. But also it's like almost like this burning sensation too. It's really hard to describe other than just being extreme, intense pain. As it turned out, it was a kidney stone. Okay, where was I? For those of you keeping track at home, I had to put the microphone down for a little bit and ended up taking a little bit of a break. So I was talking about the kidney stone, right, and where it came from. As I'd probably been saying earlier, I'd been kind of like anticipating the kidney stone because of an old home remedy my mom told me about for toothaches, which was basically all a toothache really is it's an infection in your tooth. And to get rid of an infection, you boost your immune system, which is to take, in this case, a large quantity of vitamin C. This comes from a dentist my mom once visited back in like late 70s, early 80s. She had like a really nasty abscess tooth, and he wanted to pull the tooth, but he told her not until she got rid of that abscess. And to get rid of that abscess, he was having her take like 22,000 milligrams of vitamin C, I think per meal, maybe it was per day or something like that. So, all throughout my life as I was growing up, I was kind of, always on the vitamin C because, I'd get toothaches every now and then. And as it turned out, taking a lot of vitamin C also like really helped me never really get sick very much, which, maybe this will play into something we talk about later in the podcast. But the short of it is, I get some like really bad toothaches and get up to taking like, 10,000, 15,000 milligrams of vitamin C to get rid of it over the course of like, days, sometimes like even up to a week or two. And there was this point once where I got this such a bad toothache that I don't even know how much vitamin C I was taking. It was a lot. It was so much that it was like starting to make my stomach upset. And, you start getting an upset stomach from it and you think, oh, I'm taking too much. And my mom would tell me, no. She'd say, it's impossible to take too much vitamin C. There are no side effects. And, I'm thinking, oh, well, that's impossible. Obviously, I'm having a side effect right now and it's, I don't feel good. So at one point I ended up looking up the side effects for taking excessive amounts of vitamin C, and one of the side effects I saw listed was actually kidney stones, an increased risk of kidney stones. So, thinking all these times throughout my life where I was taking all this thousands and thousands of milligrams of vitamin C, I just kind of reserved myself to thinking, oh, well, a kidney stone is something I'm going to have to deal with someday. And obviously, even as we were wheeling into the emergency room that morning, I kind of knew what it was just based on, knowing about vitamin C and kidney stones. And also, earlier this year, like say around January, I'd had to deal with what I thought was probably a kidney stone. I ended up having this, we'll say mild pain across a span of about 3 days, that I thought was probably like just a really tiny, insignificant kidney stone passing. But this one was much bigger, much more painful, and I ended up having to be hospitalized for the pain for a little while. They did some x-rays, even like I think a CAT scan, and confirmed, yep, I had a kidney stone. And if you've never really had a kidney stone before, there's not really much you can do about it, unless it's like a really bad, really big kidney stone where it's like blocking the flow of urine or whatever. Mainly the treatment for a kidney stone is just painkillers, and you got to ride it out until it comes out. So they loaded me up with oxycodone and something for the nausea, which I was feeling because it wasn't that I was like actually feeling sick. It's just that the pain was so intense that it was making me feel sick. That's how bad the pain was. Again, it's that comparison. It's kind of like being kicked in the groin. You get this kind of like feeling like you're going to throw up. That's kind of what the pain's like with a kidney stone. So they gave me anti-nausea medication. They gave me oxycodone, and the nurse sends me out of the hospital saying, you want to keep up on your pain pills because you don't want to be trapped in a scenario where the pain gets on top of you again and, you're laying on the floor, sweating bullets, unable to take it. So I went home and, popped my oxycodone and popped my anti-nausea medication, and both of them had the side effect of, making you drowsy. So I took them and I basically fell straight asleep. I woke up about 6 hours later, pain was coming back, pain in my back, took more medication and fell back asleep again. This continued for 2 or 3 days until, I finally started to realize how much I was sleeping every day. I was sleeping 10, 12, 15 hours a day, and it was starting to worry me, basically. And I was starting to, develop this new kind of pain where if I, inhale, a lot, you sigh, you go, I'd start getting, this pain around, the edges of my lungs, the outer edges. So I started thinking, well, maybe I should cut back on the pain pills if I can help it. So, I started trying to go longer and longer and longer without taking any of the oxycodone. But even then, no matter what I did, I couldn't, stay awake very long. It was like I had no physical energy to do anything. And it was around this time that I was also getting sick of my setup in my bedroom there, in my brother's spare bedroom. Up to this point, I'd been mainly sitting on the edge of my mattress with my laptop propped up on a cardboard box. And, that's how I was browsing the internet. That's how I was watching YouTube, everything like that. And it wasn't very comfortable. So I figured, if my back's starting to hurt, maybe I need a change of pace. And we had an old camping chair in my brother's shed there on his property. So, I figured, well, we have an old card table. We have this camping chair. I'll just set that up in the corner of this bedroom, and I'll put my laptop on there, and I'll actually have enough room to use a mouse and all this other stuff. So I go out and I get the table and I get the camping chair. And something I notice is that, I don't have any energy. Just unfolding the camping chair, not even sitting in it, not even, positioning it around the room or anything, just unfolding the camping chair takes me almost 20 minutes. Because every time I move even a little bit, I have to stop and take a rest because I'm just so physically exhausted. And at this point, I'd been off my painkillers for most of the day. I hadn't taken any, so there was no reason for me to feel so lethargic. And that's when I knew that there was probably a serious problem happening to me. So I gathered up as much strength as I could to walk across my brother's house and find my mom and tell her, something's wrong. I shouldn't be this tired. I shouldn't be sleeping as much as I am. And, I'd been looking up the side effects for my medication, and they said if the person taking the medication exhibits signs of extreme lethargy, to call the hospital, which, obviously at this point, I think what I was experiencing was most definitely extreme lethargy. So, I'm telling my mom about all this stuff, about, how much I'm sleeping, how tired I'm feeling, how physically, like just physically exhausted I am. And basically, in the middle of this conversation, I basically fell asleep telling her all this. That's how, absolutely exhausted I was. So she calls the hospital and they say, it's a good idea if I come in and I see them. And just to like drive this point home about how weird it is, how tired I was, I'm the kind of person who never takes naps, like never, ever, ever. I will be a walking zombie for hours if it means getting, a full night's rest later in the night instead of getting, an hour, 2 hour nap earlier in the day. So to be sleeping 14 to 16 hours a night, to be, falling asleep in the middle of conversations, that is definitely not me. So we go inside, we go to the hospital, we go back through the emergency room, all this other stuff. They check me in, they do more CAT scans, this time on my chest. And what they find out is that in addition to the kidney stone, I have now contracted pneumonia. Which is, if you don't know what pneumonia is, it's basically fluid in the lungs. It turns into this bacteria, and it can make you really, really, really sick. What they figure is that since both the nausea medication and the pain medication makes you, so sleepy, I must have tried to throw up, or I had a hiccup, or something went down the wrong pipe while I was sleeping. And since I was just so completely out of it, instead of, coughing the fluid up as you usually do when something goes down the wrong pipe, I was just so out of it, I didn't even know that it happened. So the fluid got into my lungs, it turned into this bacteria, and it was making me super, super sick. And like I was so sick that the doctor actually told me that I was practically septic. And at the time, I didn't know what that meant. What does that mean to be septic? And since then, I've looked it up on the internet, and what it links to is something called septic shock. And septic shock is when basically your body starts to shut down and you die. So the takeaway I have from this is that if we hadn't gone into the hospital that day, I might be dead right now. So, that's something that didn't sink in until fairly recently. So, they decided to keep me for basically the weekend. I think I went in on, I think it was Saturday night at like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So it was technically like, Friday night, Saturday morning at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning that I went in. No, it was Friday afternoon, I think. It was probably like 6 or 7 o'clock, actually. And they decided to keep me for the weekend, hooked me up to all these monitors, heart rate monitors. I had to wear an oxygen mask. They put me on IV fluids. I had to do these lung exercises where I'd suck air through this tube. It was scary stuff. Kind of hard to move with all that crap on me. Especially like getting up to go to the bathroom because, when you have a kidney stone, it's imperative to drink lots and lots and lots and lots of fluids and go to the bathroom a ton so that you can, flush this thing out. So, imagine I have all these heart rate monitors, like basically it's like this little squid, right? That goes in a pocket, like a breast pocket, and it's like 6 or 7 different wires that go all over your chest to monitor your heart rate. And then, you have the oxygen mask on, and then you have the cable, the IV in your arm, and you have to get up and go to the bathroom every hour, 2 hours. It's just, the first night or two I was there, I ended up having to call the nurse in to help me just get out of bed because I was so weak and I was so covered in all these, cables and stuff. And it was even worse when I'd try and sleep because, here we go again. I can't sleep because anytime I'd start to doze off, my situation was so bad that, anytime I'd try and fall asleep, all of a sudden my oxygen meter is beeping, my pulse meter is beeping because I'm dropping below the safe threshold. And, it's like, warning, 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 you're not getting enough oxygen even though you have an oxygen mask on. You're not getting enough oxygen. And so, I'd maybe doze off for a minute or two, just barely, just lightly, to where the machinery wouldn't go off with these low oxygen warnings. But, slowly, day by day, I did eventually get better. because, they were giving me all these antibiotics. They were giving me, more painkillers that were, slightly different, not as powerful to where they'd knock me out and I'd sleep so much. But just, to take the edge off, I got a stern talking to about the tenets of pain management. They must have thought I was some kind of like oxycodone addict or something when I went in there, because they're like, oh, what you're experiencing are the withdrawal symptoms of oxycodone. And then come to find out they do all these x-rays and everything. And no, actually, I have really bad pneumonia, and I could have gone to sleep and never woken up again, basically. But, even though I was getting my strength back, I still had this really intense pain in my lower left back. That never really went away. But, once I was strong enough to get up and move around, and, they could obviously tell I was clawing at the walls to get out of there, because hospitals aren't fun places to be, folks. Like, there's a certain kind of smell for a hospital that I don't think I'm in a rush to smell again. The smell of, like, really stale Lysol spray. That's terrible. But, they sent me home with, this time it was $250 worth of prescription medication. It was actually more oxycodone, but they also gave me like triple strength Tylenol, I think it is, like Tylenol 3. And they said, make sure you take the Tylenol 3 with like an antacid medication, because otherwise it could cause ulcers. And I also got a prescription for this stuff called Flomax, which is usually Flomax is prescribed for people with prostate problems. It's to increase urine flow, and they prescribed it for me to, help push the kidney stone out, because according to their x-rays, from what they were saying, it was almost out. But I knew that, like, with the pain in my back, that was actual kidney pain. That wasn't, it wasn't almost out. So, but, I had to take all these pills for like 4 weeks. Like, it was almost like a month I was on all this medication. It took, a good 3 weeks before I eventually passed it. And it was, like, I don't want to gross anyone out, but I guess the most polite way to put it was this big, ugly, almost like, I was going to say something really gross, but it was like this little reddish brown rock figure, bigger than a grain of sand, but smaller than a pea, maybe around the size of a pea. That's how big it was. And boy, it was shocking seeing that thing come out. They gave me like this filter to catch it in, and I still have the bottle floating around here somewhere with the kidney stone in it. But that was that ordeal. That felt like a month in itself, and that was like 4 days, was, being in the hospital and getting out and everything. So that was the second time I was sick. And then about a week later, after I got out of the hospital and got back to my brother's place, everyone in the house caught another cold, including me. And that was the third time I was sick. But, I think I was still so energized from the antibiotics they had me on that, the cold didn't really bother me anyway. Oh man, that was terrible. Why did I say that? But the good news is that the day I got out of the hospital, like that day, my mom had heard back from an apartment about a place that was available. So basically, I got right out of the hospital. We drove over to an apartment complex and we put in an application. With finally, having some forward momentum on finding an apartment, and Sonic Mania having been out for, gosh, at this point it was like 2 weeks. It was finally time. Well, actually, no, was it 2 weeks? Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was, because the PC version was delayed for like an extra 2 or 3 weeks. And I think Sonic Mania on consoles came out like August 28th. So figure it was like September 12th the PC version came out. So I had about a week before Sonic Mania released, but I figured, it was time for me to set up my desktop computer at my brother's place, because I needed to do my Sonic Mania video review at some point. So we got that out of storage. And, it takes me a while to get it all hooked up, because, I don't really like messing with computers that much. I built the whole computer myself, obviously, but I don't like, I was worried something would be wrong with it. And sure enough, by the time, like a week later, I finally got it all plugged in and hooked up, there was a problem with it. it was taking like forever just to boot up. We're talking like a boot up time of like 3 to 5 minutes. Like, it's like some serious Windows 98 sluggish boot up. And it's not supposed to boot up that slowly. I think, before moving, it was booting up in around like 2 minutes. So to be, 3, 5, sometimes maybe even like 10 minutes, that is an extreme increase in boot up time. So I ended up like poking around inside the system, checking all the connections, and what I ended up finding out was that certain components inside the system had shaken loose. The CPU cooling fan wasn't locked down onto the motherboard anymore, and the back plate on my graphics card had come loose, so I had to tighten a few screws here and there. And once I, gotten all the screws tightened up and everything like that, it was actually, the system was running fairly okay, but the only problem there after that was that, I didn't have any internet. One of the very first things I bought all the way back in like February or March when it became obvious that we were moving out here to Nevada was I bought a TP-Link USB Wi-Fi adapter for like $12 because I knew that, for at least a while we'd have a setup where I wouldn't be able to run an Ethernet cable to my desktop like I'd been doing. So, I bought this Wi-Fi adapter to have Wi-Fi while I was at my brother's and, wherever else, I don't know. I wasn't quite sure how the internet setup was going to be here in the apartment. So, I get that hooked in, I get that plugged in, I get set up on the internet, and everything seems fine until the day after. So I'm the type of person that when I'm using the computer, I shut it down at the end of the day. It's not like a laptop where you can just close the lid, right? You have a desktop that I don't want running all day, every day, forever. It's something that, I specifically go through the process of shutting down and turning off for the night. And what ended up happening is that I'd shut it off for the night, I'd go to bed, I'd wake up in the morning, and I'd turn the system on, and after it would get through the, the BIOS screen telling me that, what all hardware is plugged into the system, it would, instead of loading into Windows, it would boot into a black screen. It would just hang there on this black screen displaying nothing. And the only way to fix it would be once it hangs on this black screen, if I hit the reset button, then it would boot up and load into Windows normally. And, obviously I start freaking out that something else in the system is wrong. A friend suggests, maybe it's a power supply issue. Maybe something inside the power supply rattled loose while it was being transported across from Colorado to Nevada. And I think, okay, well, that makes some sense. So for a while, I'm starting to think, what if it's the power cable? The power cable that connects from the system to the power strip or whatever. Because I had like 3 or 4 different power cables, and usually I like to use the newest one possible. Because I've got this weird paranoia that, maybe one day the power cable itself will be bad. So I'm thinking, is it the power cable? Maybe it's the power strip. Because we've also had over the years power strips burn out, right? Once a power strip reaches a certain age, it's kind of like it starts to develop these problems. And the power strip I was using at the time was at least 10 years old. So I'm thinking, okay, well, this could be a power problem. This could be a problem with the power strip. It could be a problem with the power cable, even though, everyone's telling me that it doesn't make any sense for it to be a problem with the power cable. So I start, trying a bunch of different solutions or just, messing around basically to see what happens when I change where the power strip is plugged in, what happens when I change where the power cable is plugged in. And at some point, I get it into my stupid brain to plug the desktop directly into the wall outlet. And of course, that doesn't fix anything, but it doesn't have any negative impact either, so I just leave it plugged directly into the wall outlet, and I figure, okay, that's fine. Even though, I'm trying to think, is there a problem here? Is there a reason I shouldn't be doing this? I can't remember. And eventually, it dawns on me one morning. I'm laying in bed, and I'm, thinking about my computer problems, and it's like a light bulb goes off, and I think, oh, wait, this black screen problem didn't start until I plugged in the TP-Link USB Wi-Fi adapter. So immediately I spring out of bed and I get on my tablet and I Google TP-Link USB Wi-Fi adapter black screen. And sure enough, I get posts from the Microsoft tech support community of people reporting this problem with almost the exact same USB Wi-Fi adapter I'm using. I'm thinking, okay, that's the problem. And sure enough, I unplug the Wi-Fi adapter from the desktop and it boots up straight away perfectly, just like it's supposed to. So that problem is solved. It's the USB Wi-Fi adapter. And that day, I order a brand new, much more expensive, much more higher quality internal Wi-Fi card from Asus, however you want to say that. And I think, okay, this problem is now solved. My desktop is back up and running. Everything's fine. And, I use it for like a week and everything's cool. And then the internal Wi-Fi adapter gets here and I put that in and everything seems fine. The computer is working as it should. But, of course, the more technically minded of you out there will note that I said I plugged the computer directly into the wall outlet. And I know some of you are probably going, oh no, he messed up when he did that. And now I'm saying, oh no, I messed up when I did that. Because I left it plugged into the wall. I forgot about it, The system was working just fine with it plugged directly into the wall outlet. And I couldn't even remember anyway why that was supposed to be such a bad idea. Until one day, we'll say about 2 weeks after I solved this USB Wi-Fi adapter problem, I left my bedroom to go to the bathroom or to go get dinner or something. And I come back and obviously my TV/monitor is turned off because I was gone, away from the computer long enough that, it went into sleep mode or it turned the screen off or whatever it does. And I turn the TV back on and I move the mouse to get the system to come back. And instead of coming back, the system reboots. And I think, that's weird. Maybe the graphics card just kind of like freaked out a little bit, right? And the system comes back up. It takes like a really long time. It probably took like 20 minutes for the system to finally reboot. And there's no Wi-Fi. And the graphics card drivers are corrupted. And my USB ports are having driver controller problems. And it's just like the whole system just fell apart in an instant. What I assume happened is I had the desktop plugged directly into the outlet, right? And when you do that, you open your system up to what are called power surges. When the power goes out, obviously, you stop getting electricity to your system. And apparently that night while I slept, the power had gone out and I hadn't realized it. What happens is the problem isn't when the power goes out. The problem is when the power comes back on. Think of it kind of like a fire hose, right? You turn the fire hose on full blast. And where is all the pressure going to be on the hose? Well, it's going to be where the water is first entering the hose. That's where, you get this really big, like, high pressure blast of water at the start, and then it kind of evens out a little bit over time. And that's kind of what happens with electricity. When the electricity comes back on, you get this big surge of juice right at the start, and then it, evens back out and gets back to normal. And this big surge of power, if it goes into like a computer system or something like that, it can actually cause permanent damage to the components inside the system. I had it plugged directly into the outlet, and presumably that's what happened. It doesn't even matter if the system is turned off. What it matters, so all computers also have like a power switch on the back that's basically opening or closing the circuit between the computer and the wall outlet. So if your computer is turned off, but the power switch on the power supply is still turned on, then you're still open to the possibility of getting zapped with power surges, which is what happened to me. At the time, I didn't know this, but, this is something that I've just learned since then. But, at the time, I was trying everything. I was trying to reinstall drivers. I was trying to, figure out why the Wi-Fi wasn't working. And eventually, the system just started giving me blue screens of death. and it would just give me, I'd be able to use the system for like an hour or two, and then I'd get a blue screen of death. And then I'd be able to use the system for maybe 45 minutes to an hour, and then I'd get a blue screen of death. And then that became 30 minutes, and that became 10 minutes. And then eventually it got so bad where I couldn't even use the system at all. I'd boot into Windows, go to shut down, and before it would even finish shutting down, it would do a blue screen and reboot. So, I eventually just turned the system off. I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to deal with anything at this point. I'd spent time in the hospital. We were stuck at my brother's. We couldn't get out, whatever else. And just, I didn't feel like dealing with my computer at all. So I turned it off. I shut it down. Or I guess that's backwards. I shut it down and then turned it off. And that's just the way it was. It sat there for like 3 weeks. Friends gave me lists of things to try, like, reinstalling Windows, changing out the motherboard, all this stuff, and that, I just didn't feel like doing because just, everything was coming to a head. Because, like, if you don't know, it kind of feels like my experience with computers over the last decade has kind of been just a constant series of worst nightmares, right? So it was all the way back in 2007 that my cousin first had me build my first custom PC. He had some leftover parts and he said, if you can buy a motherboard for me, then, we'll put a computer together like that. We'll just put it together. I'll come over, I'll help you install the components and everything like that. And right from the very first time we did that, we were having problems. We corrupted the master boot record on a really important hard drive. I was getting like random freezes for like 2 or 3 years that ended up being a bad motherboard. I went through like just horrible luck with hard drives for like 3 or 4 years. It felt like just one major computer disaster after another, basically. And, having my entire system melt down like this, again, not even 14 months after I'd built the system, it was just, I couldn't deal with it. I didn't want to deal with it. I wasn't in a position to deal with it. So that was what? Late September-ish? Yeah, it had to be. I think. Gosh, I don't even remember. It has been so long, and I've been rambling in this podcast for so long. It's like an hour and 22 minutes by my clock. But, I ended up just playing through Sonic Mania on my laptop and just kind of ignoring the computer system for now. It just kind of sat on my dresser in my brother's spare bedroom there, and I didn't think about it. But then we ended up getting some fairly good news in the middle of all this. And that was the apartment called us back and they said, okay, your application checks out. If you want to move in, you can move in the middle of November. And keep in mind that this was late September at this point. So, even though we had technically found a place, we were still stuck in my brother's spare bedrooms for like another 2 months at this point. But, at the very least, we had finally found an apartment. We hadn't seen it yet, but they said, it was ours if we wanted it. So that was at least some good news. So from then on, it was just kind of a matter of, surviving Halloween. And eventually I did end up, trying to mess around with my desktop a little bit more. I said earlier, one of the pieces of advice I got was to, simply try reinstalling Windows on it and see what happened. And that really just confirmed what I basically assumed all along, and that was that it was a motherboard problem because, I finally went through and reinstalled Windows on the system, and, even on a fresh copy of Windows 10, it was still giving me the same errors. It still couldn't find the Wi-Fi card. It was still giving me like random hard drive errors. Like by this point, I think Sonic Forces was out, and I went to install Sonic Forces to try and get going on my reviews for it, and Steam gave me back this error that was, can't write to disk write error or whatever, and that's because the motherboard was bad. And let's hope that it's just the motherboard, because by now I've ordered a replacement motherboard. I have a new copy of Windows 10 coming in, and there's a whole reason that I had to buy a new copy of Windows 10. But we won't get into that right now. Well, I guess we could get into it right now. The Basically, the current version of Windows 10 I was using was like a business edition that I'm technically not supposed to have. I bummed it off my cousin. So when you like change out a motherboard on a modern Windows system now, it will actually tell you, there's like a motherboard mismatch. You have to call Microsoft and basically tell them, hey, here's my system. I put in a new motherboard. Can you whitelist my new motherboard to be used with this Windows 10 key? And I didn't want to go through that trouble with this weird business version of Windows 10 or whatever it was. It was technically a business key for Windows 7, which I then upgraded to Windows 10 from. So I didn't really want to call Microsoft and explain that I'd bummed a free key off of a friend or whatever. So I just ended up buying a new copy of Windows 10, like just a couple days ago, actually. It should be here in a few days, and then I can finally get through the process of switching out motherboards and everything else. But yeah, basically I fried the motherboard on that system. If you didn't pick up through all my weird rambling, I know like my notes feel fairly coherent, but what happens is I end up glancing at my notes and then I'll ignore like 10 points because I'll think, oh, I remember everything I wanted to say. And then I'll just end up rambling through like 4 different tangents, and at least to me, it feels like total nonsense. I don't know about if any of you listening can actually follow along with what I'm talking about. And like just buying the motherboard for the new system was actually like another really stressful situation. Because for like a really long time, I'd waffled on whether or not I even wanted to buy a new motherboard. Because there was for like a good long while, like at least a month, I wasn't entirely sure it was a motherboard problem. That's why I needed to try reinstalling Windows 10 first, was to actually verify that it was, an issue with the hardware and not just like a weird driver corruption or whatever. Because you'd think that if it was like a power surge that it would also damage the power supply, but the power supply thankfully has at least a 10-year warranty attached to it. So I think if the power supply is also fried, then I can just get a new one. Let's hope. And let's hope that it wasn't anything like, let's hope the hard drives didn't get fried. Let's hope the processor didn't get fried. Hopefully, it was just the motherboard. And now I look at my notes here and I kind of went off script a little bit. Because like the entire reason I never like installed the motherboard at my brother's place is just because it's incredibly hard to stay motivated on this kind of stuff. My new bed kind of sucks for starters. I had a really big, I think it was like a queen size mattress back in Colorado that was really soft and really plush, and the mattress my brother got me here out in Nevada is like, I guess they call it like a full size or like a twin bed. It's basically a mattress just big enough for one human body. Like my arms hang off, my legs hang off, and I'm not necessarily that tall of a person. I don't think I necessarily have very long arms. It's just a very small mattress. So I had to like get used to sleeping on that. And then there's like the other fact, like, even though I made it out of the hospital, minus pneumonia, and, eventually passed the kidney stone and everything, the hospital did give me, like, a lasting physical issue. Ever since high school, we'll say, like, roughly, if I sit or lay the wrong way, I get, like, this numb spot in my right, like, upper thigh. And usually, like, if I shift around or whatever, the numb spot will go away. But when I went into the hospital, obviously you have to lay in the hospital bed. And since I had pneumonia, which was in my lungs, they had me sleep a certain way, which was sleep sitting up. And, at some point my leg went numb. The numb spot grew and spread. And like, I guess beforehand, before even going into the hospital, this new mattress was causing me problems with that numb spot too. It was actually like genuinely starting to hurt because it was, I couldn't reposition myself to get rid of it. So, I'd wake up in the morning with like this burning, intense pain in my right thigh, and then going into the hospital and sleeping in the hospital bed, it just got like 1,000 times worse. I'd just shift a little bit and it'd be like 1,000 needles running down my leg. And eventually that feeling went away, and that's because eventually my entire right thigh just went numb. And, as of this recording in, what is it? It's like December 7th, December 9th, feeling still has not come back in my right thigh. Which is, it's not really like that much of a problem. Like, it doesn't affect my mobility any. It's not really that painful anymore. It's just, it's a weird feeling. It's something that's more mental at this point than anything else, because like it's just numb. It doesn't affect blood flow, and if I push on my leg hard enough, it's like the muscles underneath the skin. I can feel that. It's just the very surface of the skin that's numb. And every now and then I will get like a little poke of pain in one of the numb areas, but it's just. That's a big bummer. The fact that I have this numb spot now that may never go away. I did tell the doctors before I left the hospital, and I think I ended up telling like 2 nurses and an actual doctor, and all of them just kind of shrugged at me when I told them about this problem, that this numb spot that wasn't going away. They just kind of went, "Oh, well, exercise more." So, maybe it'll go away, maybe it won't. To be honest, it's just a pinched nerve. Like, I actually ended up looking it up after I got out of the hospital. Let's see, where did I write it down? It's called neuralgia paresthesia, I think. It's this, like, right where your leg connects to your hip. Along the front of your leg, there's like this nerve that runs under a tendon. And if you're overweight, or if there's certain different ways that a nerve can become pinched. And since this has been with me basically since high school, since, way back when I was having panic attacks and everything else, and I weighed 80 pounds, I think it's not necessarily because I'm overweight, though I am a little overweight. I think it's just mainly just a weird, like, pinched nerve thing that just never gone away. And now it's permanently pinched. It may never get unpinched. I guess, like, in extreme scenarios, they can do surgery to reposition the nerve, but I don't know if I want to do surgery in that regard. But just the thought of that happening, it's a real bummer, like, that's a problem I'm going to have to think about now when I do other things. Like, I'm poking my leg right now, and I don't know, it's weird. It's weird and uncomfortable, but not in a physical way, in a mental way, if that makes any sense. And it's just, with everything else, with just, like, there were 7 people living at my brother's place. It's just all this other stuff, the computer breaking down, my leg, missing my review deadlines by weeks and then months. It's just, I didn't feel like dealing with anything. I didn't want to take my computer apart. I tried focusing on a little bit of game development here on the laptop, and, that didn't really pan out. I just couldn't stay focused on anything. It's like, thinking about it now, like, if you heard the June podcast, it was obvious I didn't want to come to Nevada. I was practically on the verge of tears when we last spoke. And that kind of changed. Once I actually was forced to let go of the house, and we were on the train ride coming out here. It was that night I told you guys about earlier, about not being able to sleep that night. I woke up probably around 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. It was just starting to get light out. And I remember looking outside the train window as we were rolling into Nevada for the first time. We hadn't quite gone through the mountains yet. We weren't... Because, like, I guess, like, a set of mountains, Nevada was right on the edge of the Rocky Mountains. We were on the east side of the Nevada Rocky Mountains, and it was just all this, like, green farmland and sort of these, like, little thicketed forest areas. And it for the first time probably ever, it kind of reminded me of taking the bus into Boulder, Colorado. And it was just such an amazing feeling where it was like, I saw Nevada for the first time, and it wasn't too hot. It wasn't too dry. It looked like Colorado. And I remember thinking, maybe it won't be so bad living here in Nevada. And then we get off the train, and, it feels like I'm ready, to embrace this new state finally. And then I got sick. Then we couldn't get in contact with the housing authority. Then I got sick again, and I got so sick that it put me in the hospital and almost killed me. And then I got out of the hospital, and then I got sick again. And then my computer blows up, and then I miss all my deadlines, and it's just, since we got here, it feels like one nightmare after another. Even though I have tried my hardest, my best, to be positive about everything. And it's just a huge bummer, to try to be welcoming and accepting. And it feels like the state of Nevada itself doesn't want me here, It's just been a lot harder than I ever even thought it was going to be. And like the new apartment is weird too, because obviously I think they did a really good job with like soundproofing it, but only insofar as soundproofing from the inside out. So like if you're outside the apartment, you can't really hear anything inside the apartment. But the actual room to room to room, the walls feel incredibly thin. And, that's a problem. That's going to be a problem going forward with live streams and video reviews and things like that. And it's just, you don't realize how good you have it until you lose it, I guess. And when I first got to Nevada, I didn't think I was going to miss Colorado as much as I am right at this very moment. And like I mentioned earlier that I'm going to have to edit out a lot of coughs and sniffles and everything else, and it's because I actually ended up getting sick a fourth time just after Thanksgiving. I caught a really nasty cold that has been with me for like the last 2.5 weeks, and it just won't go away. So you figure in the 5 or 6 months I've been in Nevada, I've been sick 4 times, and one of those times almost killed me, as I keep repeating. It feels like the absolute worst things could have happened when they did. And at this point, I've spent like $300 trying to get my computer back up and running. Between the new motherboard, between Windows 10, between the Wi-Fi card, between buying new furniture. I bought this new chair here on a Black Friday sale. I think it was normally like a $150 computer chair. I got it for like $70, but that's still $70, I saved up all this money knowing that I was going to have to rebuy a lot of stuff, but it's just, it's such a bummer that I have to do it anyway, and especially right now when it's around Christmas, I could be buying Christmas presents for people, and instead I have to buy all this junk for myself. Then there's the internet, right? Where we live in Carson City, the only internet service provider worth using is Charter Spectrum, which apparently is a Time Warner Cable company, which I've heard Time Warner Cable is the only internet service provider worse than Comcast, and that's the only option we have out here. And right now we're paying for 60 megabits down, and I don't know if the guy came out and installed it wrong or what, but we're lucky to get 15 megabits, and we're paying for 60. And, there's a part of me that knows that if we call Charter or Spectrum or whoever and tell them that our internet's crap, they're just going to say, put up with it, deal with it, because I guess the entire apartment complex is wired for Spectrum, and I'm assuming they're just going to say that, we're all running on the same cable, and it all depends on, the load of how many other people are using the internet inside the apartment complex. Which is, I've heard that about other places people have lived, and that just sounds terrible to me, To pay for 60 megabits and only be able to use 15 on top of everything else. Like, okay, so back in Colorado, we had our own clothes washer and our own clothes dryer that, we could do laundry whenever we wanted for, however much fabric softener we had. There's not enough room in this apartment. There's not even any hookups for a washer and dryer here. We have to go down to the laundry room, the communal apartment complex laundry room, which is $3 for a load of laundry. And if you figure, me and my mom have to do our own laundry separately, then we're talking like $6 per person at the very least. I haven't washed my clothes since Thanksgiving. And, it's just one problem after another, over and over and over again. And there was a problem earlier I didn't even mention. So I mentioned the landlords coming out and doing an inspection for the house and, telling us, oh, it's fine, all the damages are just general wear and tear over 24 years or whatever. When we were waiting to hear back from the Nevada Housing Authority, we actually heard back from the Colorado Housing Authority that our landlords were actually trying to get us to pay them a bill of $80,000 because, supposedly they had to haul 3 tons of garbage out of the property, and, the house was in such a state of disrepair that they just eventually have to sell it. They couldn't rent it anymore. And like the entire reason we had to move out is because, they wanted to raise the rent on us. We were paying, I think, about $1,400 for that place, and they wanted to raise it up to, almost $2,000, which for the quality of the place where we were living, like $2,000 is way too much. And, that when they came for the inspection the day before we left the house, they actually told us that they thought they maybe could get as much as $2,200 a month for that place. And boy, that sounded like a pipe dream to me. And now that we've moved out here to Nevada and they're saying, oh, the house was so damaged, we need all this money for repairs, give us $80,000. It seems a little ironic to me that, they were trying to squeeze us for basically another $1,000 a month in rent, and, now they have to sell the property. But, obviously, I don't think we left 3 tons of garbage behind at the old place. And, I think their claims are insane. And thankfully, what ended up happening was when we heard from the Colorado Housing Authority about this so-called $80,000 bill, what the Colorado Housing Authority ended up doing was they got our backs. They said, oh, this sounds like a problem with the landlord. It's not really your problem. And I guess what they ended up telling our old landlords was that because we had successfully ported to Nevada, we were now out of the jurisdiction of the Colorado Housing Authority, and that there was nothing that could be done about the $80,000 bill. But it's still like a huge bummer to have these people that, we kind of considered our friends a little bit. I know I said earlier that we went to great lengths to avoid them when we first moved in, but they were all smiles and hugs and, it's okay, here's our contact information, keep in touch while you're in Nevada, things like that. And then for them to, do this hard 180 and say, here's this huge bill for almost $100,000 for a bunch of stuff we said you didn't do. It's like this really weird stab in the back from people that were supposedly so caring not even weeks prior. And technically my mom's talking about like maybe we could sue them for that because obviously we lived there for 24 years. We paid like a $500 deposit when we moved in, and when we move out, we're supposed to get that deposit back. Or else the deposit is supposed to be used, for repairs. And according to what I understand of the law, we're supposed to get a letter from the landlords about our deposit, either saying that, here's the money from that deposit that was put into a bank account and gained interest, or here's a letter describing what we used the deposit to do for repairs. And supposedly, if you live in a place long enough, you're supposed to be automatically guaranteed that deposit back. So we didn't get any letter, we didn't get any money. So theoretically, the law is on our side. They could like owe us as much as $1,500 for, unpaid deposit fees or whatever. It's just, but, I guess the simple fact of the matter is, being in Nevada kind of sucks. Like, just straight up. Like, I'm not even going to mince words anymore. Like, we pass houses going to the supermarket that fly, like, don't tread on me flags, like, that coiled snake. There's all kinds of trucks and everything with proud Trump supporter stickers, and, I guess it is what people would call a very red state. And it's a very scary feeling place to live. Very scary feeling place to live. But, at least the view's pretty. Right? Like, we live in, I guess it's called the Greater Nevada Basin, which means we have mountains all around us, and it's a pretty nice view, especially when it snows, and it's been snowing up in the higher elevations and stuff. And at one point, and we have family out here, obviously, and an aunt took us to something called like Davis National Park for lunch one day, and that was beautiful. That was like nothing I could ever get to in Colorado without driving for hours and hours and hours and hours. And here it's like a 15-minute drive away. It's wild. But yeah, I guess that big rambling 2-hour podcast is, everything I've been doing for the last 6 months. And it's a big bummer. It's definitely a big bummer, but hopefully from here on out things will start to normalize a little bit. We have to find thrift stores so that I can hopefully get a new desk on the cheap so that I can, finally have a place to set up my desktop to get around to repairing that, because, changing out a motherboard means basically taking every component out of the system and then putting it into the new motherboard. And it's basically like rebuilding the entire thing from scratch. Gotta get, dressers, gotta get a desk, I think that's probably about it, really. Maybe some lights. I'm currently have a lamp sitting here on my bedroom floor that's, not very easy to reach. If you want like a recap of the games I've been playing, we'll go down a list like super quickly. Obviously, Sonic Mania came out since now and the last time we talked. I think if I put up like the raw uncut recording for the audio for that, so if, you can go listen to that right now if you want, but obviously, it's kind of sloppy, it's kind of a mess, kind of like this podcast, really. But I think some people might be surprised by what I have to say about that game. I don't exactly have a glowing opinion on what I think about Sonic Mania, but I definitely don't hate it either. I love parts of it, but I merely like other parts of it. Let's say it's not going to be on my Game of the Year list, if I'm even going to put together a Game of the Year list. Haven't played Sonic Forces. I bought that on Steam. Obviously, I don't have a computer to play it on, so I can't play it. So that's waiting until I rebuild my system. That will also have a video review for it probably at some point, even if it's like January or whatever. Like, I will have a video review for Sonic Forces. I've basically just been playing a lot of junk on my laptop. Ended up playing through Heretic and this Doom 2 mod called Ancient Aliens through something called High Noon Drifter. High Noon Drifter is kind of a mod that goes on top of other mods that adds all these weapons and new gameplay systems, like, a 6-shooter revolver and equipable items like ghost guns, and you get the special ability that's basically McCree's ultimate from Overwatch, the High Noon. You'll get like this slow-mo and all these crosshairs. It's pretty cool. I recommend playing High Noon Drifter at least through Doom 2. Obviously there's support for Heretic. That Heretic plus High Noon Drifter ends up being this kind of weird, fun mashup that I really like. I played through this hidden object game where the ghost of Abraham Lincoln sends you to stop a coven of witches from ruling the world or whatever. I mean, it was a lot more fun than you'd think a hidden object game would be, but it was also super lame because there was like no storyline to the game beyond what I just explained to you about, the ghost of Abraham Lincoln sending you on a time travel adventure to stop witches. Ugh. I played a little bit of this game called Super Fancy Pants Adventures on Steam, which is a sequel to an Xbox Live Arcade game called Fancy Pants Adventures, which is based on like this old Flash game from Newgrounds and Congregate called Fancy Pants Adventures. It's kind of like a Sonic the Hedgehog game if it was, all stick figures, and it's a pretty cool game, but it doesn't run very well on my laptop. So, I haven't really played tons of that. I probably played like the first hour or two. Obviously I bought all these Steam games to play for Dare to Scare for Halloween this year that I didn't get around to. The Resident Evil remake, Outlast, I'm Scared, games like that, I never got around to playing. Played and finished AM2R, at least, the Metroid 2 remake, another Metroid 2 remake. In fact, that's actually a really good game. Like, normally with fan games, there's always a little bit of caution when you go into a fan game about, whether or not it's actually going to be super polished, whether or not the person making the fan game actually understands the game that they're sort of paying tribute to, things like that. AM2R is incredible. It may as well be an official Nintendo product for exactly, how polished and fun and just cool, how cool the game is. So, if you haven't played AM2R yet, definitely track it down, give it a look. It has my seal of approval. That is a very excellent, excellent game. I guess that's kind of it as far as playing through full games goes. I did end up starting a bunch more games. Turok Dinosaur Hunter, even though that's like an N64 game that doesn't run very well on my laptop. I started Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, which was, supposedly I've heard that's the best Shantae game, but I'm having trouble actually really focusing on it. It seems kind of boring to me. I got Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight, which is like a fantastic 2D sprite based. It's almost kind of like a Dark Souls game. I played probably a couple hours of that. I really like the style of that game. I like the production value. It's just, I'm not in a super great mood to focus down on such a hardcore game like that right now. So, I played a couple hours of it, maybe an hour, and I haven't really gone back to it. I suppose the one silver lining in all of this is that, just kind of to make myself feel better, and also because it was on sale for Black Friday, I ended up buying a PlayStation 4 Pro finally. I have finally entered this generation of video game consoles, and that's generally because, to explain a little bit, for the Wii U, what I ended up doing to get a Wii U was my boss from TSSC News, Tristan. He offered to go half and half with me on buying the Wii U. So, we did that, and I ended up getting that Wii U for $150, which, isn't bad considering how much I actually genuinely like the Wii U. So when the PlayStation 4 Pro went on sale for Black Friday, I hit him up again and I said, hey, do you want to go half and half on another game console with me? So I ended up getting this PlayStation 4 Pro. Normally they're $400. I ended up getting it, I think I only paid probably $175 to $200. So I got it for basically half price. So that's not bad at all. And the PlayStation 4 Pro is pretty cool. It's alright. I haven't exactly played a ton of games on it just yet. With the console, I ended up buying Yakuza Kiwami because it was $20 for the Steelbook edition, and I ended up buying the Nathan Drake collection, so that's Uncharted 1, 2, and 3. That was on sale on PSN for about $8, so I ended up buying that. I haven't played either of those yet. I've mainly been sticking to demo versions of games and things like that. I played the Watch Dogs 2 demo, which was okay, It was Watch Dogs. Some of it was a little cringeworthy, but the graphics were pretty, and I guess the gameplay seems fine. The game still feels kind of like a mess to me, though. I don't know, it's weird. But the real standout thing that I've played on the PS4 so far is the demo for Dragon Quest Builders. I feel like a lot of people slept on this game. The demo is actually super big, super meaty. There's probably 4 or 5 hours of content just in the demo alone. Think of it kind of like Animal Crossing plus Viva Pinata plus Minecraft, but it's also like an action RPG set in the classic Dragon Quest universe. And if none of that makes any sense, basically, the way the story of the game is told to you is that you're the only person left in the world who is intelligent enough to remember how to build anything. Apparently, you live in a world of morons. They're all cursed to, not be smart enough to be able to read or write or understand construction. You are literally the only person that remembers how to build anything. So It's your job to rebuild like all the towns in the game by hand, using materials you find in the world. So, that's where the Minecraft element comes in, is that, you'll be able to build like specific rooms, and then once you have a room, an NPC from, in the overworld will come into your town and claim that room as their own. And that's kind of like where it's Viva Pinata, right? Is where, you kind of have to have your town has to have specific conditions to attract specific types of NPCs, and I guess that's kind of like Terraria too. And then once you get these NPCs that inhabit your town, they'll start giving you quests. Like they'll say, oh, I want a room to be able to cook food in. So then your player character will realize, he'll think about it hard enough and he'll think, okay, this is what the blueprint for a cooking pot looks like. And then you have to go out into the world and you have to collect the materials to build the pot so that people can cook things. And then, it just goes on like this, where they'll say, oh, I want a storage room. So your character will think, okay, here's how to build a treasure chest. You go down into the world, you collect materials for the treasure chest, you bring it all back to the town, and then you build the room with the treasure chest. You build beds, you build, lights, you build crafting tables, things like that. And unlike Minecraft is a sort of game where you can sort of do anything you want at any time as long as you have the materials for it. Like, Minecraft is the sort of game where you have to play it with a guide in your other hand so that you know all the crafting recipes and things like that. That's not true of Dragon Quest Builders. You can't build anything until you get a quest about how to build it. And then, your character realizes the recipe and all you need is the materials for it. If that makes any sense. So it ends up being like this kind of like really limiting system where you have to make do with only the things that you know how to build. And that might sound a little bit lame. That might sound kind of like it defeats the purpose of Minecraft, because Minecraft is, about building castles and, digging into the ground and whatever. And you can't dig very far in Dragon Quest Builders. You can't even swim. So, the game takes place on these islands and you just have to make do with the materials you're given. And that ends up being like where all the fun is, because, when you think about it, I guess this is like a game designer sort of mentality, but the real fun of something is working within limitations, right? It's being creative inside of the narrow boundaries you're given, basically. And that's what like really makes Dragon Quest Builders fun, I think, is that, you can't just run out and chop down a tree and then suddenly you have wood. You have to use dirt, you have to use only the very specific materials you're given, because you only have a very basic idea of the things that need to be built. You can't just build anything you want at any time. You have to work within the limitations you're given. And that's where all the fun is. And it is actually really fun, I think. I think, like I said earlier, I think a lot of people slept on Dragon Quest Builders. I think they saw it just as a really cheap Minecraft clone, and I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's actually, done as much as it can to define itself within the limitations of the Minecraft structure to be its own unique thing that is, completely different. And, if you haven't played Minecraft Builders, it's on PS4, it's on the Switch. I think there's even a PS3 version. So, get out there and, give it a shot if you haven't. You might be pleasantly surprised. And like I said, the demo is huge. Like, I guess the only real downside is that the demo covers the entire tutorial. So, to give you an idea, it's this 4 to 5 hour tutorial. And definitely, especially when you first start the demo, there is a lot of text to go through. As it explains how to dig, how to craft, how recipes work, things like that. But, obviously, as you go, as you learn how to do things, the game gives you fewer and fewer tutorials until eventually you reach a point where it says, I got nothing left to teach you. Just go, finish the last remaining quests of the demo, and then we'll see what happens. And I should also mention that, the entire point of, building up the city and everything is that eventually you get to a point where enemy like armies will raid your city, and that's kind of what you're building up to. I forgot to mention that earlier. Like, that's like the whole point of the game, right? Is that the Dragon Lord or whatever is trying to take over the world, and you have to build up these cities to repel his attacks. But yeah, Dragon Quest Builders, check it out. I definitely highly, highly recommend it. It's probably going to be a game I will buy for my PS4 at some point in the future. But yeah, I think that's just about it. We're over the 2-hour mark here. We should be coming up on, just a little over 2 hours. So I'm going to wrap it up. That's been the last 6 months since we last checked in. Again, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for still supporting me here on Patreon, especially with all like the weird fees, the whole like thing that's going around Patreon these days about increasing the per patron submission fee or whatever it is, where supposedly I'm supposed to get more money, but you're supposed to pay more money. I don't know. I haven't really looked into it a lot, but it just sounds like Patreon is really messing up on how like fees are processed and things like that. So, if any of you like want to delete your pledge or anything like that, I'll understand. All of you out there pledging $1, I think it's going up to like $1.35, maybe even like $2, even though I only get $1 of that. I don't know. But, if any of you want to just stop pledging, I'll understand. There are also like Patreon alternatives that are starting to spring up in the wake of this. I don't know if I'm going to like move off Patreon yet or not. I suppose it depends on whether or not people abandon my Patreon or not. And, if anything else emerges as the clear successor to Patreon, right? I think everyone is going to give Patreon, the website, like a 1-month grace period to see if they like change back to the old system or if they really are committed on this new weird fee system or not. So I don't know. We'll wait and see. But again, if any of you want to stop supporting me here on Patreon because the fees get to be too big or whatever, I'll completely understand. It'll be a bummer, but it's also not entirely in my hands now, is it? So, if you guys can't afford it, then that's just how the cookie crumbles. But, again, I can't thank you enough for supporting me as much as you have. And I gotta go. I gotta get out of here. My throat's starting to hurt. I've been talking nonstop for a very long time. So, I'll see you guys hopefully next month. And hopefully things will be better by then, huh? Yeah. Well, see ya.
When my passion flows.